When I returned from my business trip to Europe, I found my sister Jasmine living in my $2 million villa with her 3 kids, claiming our parents had given it to her as an early inheritance. The locks were changed, my belongings boxed up in the garage, and a handwritten note from Dad saying I was too selfish to deserve such a beautiful home. But what they didn't know was that I had installed hidden security cameras everywhere before I left. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this wild family drama, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. If you're ready for a story about family betrayal and sweet justice, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this revenge tale is going to blow your mind. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. My name is Serafina, and I never thought my own parents would orchestrate the biggest betrayal of my life. 3 weeks earlier, I had kissed my parents goodbye at the airport, trusting them with the spare keys to my villa, while I flew to London for a month-long business conference. I had worked 15 years to buy that house, every overtime hour, every weekend. Sacrifice, every penny saved had gone toward making my dream home a reality. The villa sat on 2 acres of pristine California coastline, complete with an infinity pool wine cellar and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I had specifically chosen a property with enough space for family gatherings, imagining holiday dinners and birthday celebrations where everyone felt welcome. My parents had always praised my success, telling friends and neighbors how proud they were of their ambitious daughter. But something felt wrong the moment my Uber turned into the driveway. Jasmine's minivan sat in my usual parking spot, and children's toys were scattered across my perfectly manicured lawn. Through the front windows, I could see my sister lounging on my custom Italian leather sofa, talking on her phone, while her youngest daughter drew on my coffee table with permanent markers. When I tried my key, it wouldn't turn. The locks had been completely changed. I rang the doorbell, on my own house, and waited as footsteps approached. Jasmine opened the door with a smug smile, blocking the entrance with her body. "Oh, Sarah's back early," she called over her shoulder to someone inside. "Mom, Dad, she's here." My parents emerged from my kitchen, my mother carrying my favorite coffee mug, and my father wearing the expensive cashmere robe I had bought him for Christmas. They looked completely at ease, as if this was perfectly normal. "Sweetheart, we need to talk," Mom said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used when I was a child. "We've made some family decisions while you were gone." "Decisions about my house?" I asked, my voice cracking with disbelief. Dad stepped forward, his chest puffed out in that authoritative way he used when delivering ultimatums. "Jasmine needs this place more than you do. She has 3 children and her apartment is too small. You're single, you travel constantly for work. This house is wasted on you." "Wasted on me, I bought this house. I paid for every square inch of it. With money you never would have earned without the education we provided," Mom interjected. "Everything you have, you owe to us. We sacrificed so much to put you through college, and this is how you can give back to the family." Jasmine crossed her arms and smiled. "Besides, the kids love it here. Look how happy they are." Through the window, I could see her 8-year-old son jumping on my white sectional sofa with muddy shoes, while her 6-year-old daughter used my expensive kitchen knives to cut up cardboard boxes. "You can't just take my house," I said, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. "This is theft." "It's family redistribution," Dad replied matter-of-factly. "We talked to our lawyer, and since your name isn't on any family trust documents and we co-signed your original mortgage application years ago, we have legal standing to claim joint ownership." That was a lie, and I knew it. I had refinanced the house completely on my own 3 years ago, removing their names from everything. But they were counting on me not knowing my own legal position, just like they had counted on my absence to pull off this scheme. "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for my phone. "Go ahead." Jasmine laughed. "What are you going to tell them? That your loving family is taking care of your house while you're traveling? That your parents are visiting their grandchildren? There's no crime here, Sarah. Just you being dramatic as usual." I looked around at my home, seeing my life's work being casually destroyed by people who were supposed to love and support me. My grandmother's antique vase sat in pieces on the fireplace mantel, apparently broken and hastily glued back together. Red wine stains covered my white Persian rug. The walls that I had carefully painted in soft neutrals were now decorated with crayon drawings and scotch-taped children's artwork. "Where are my belongings?" I demanded. "Boxed up in the garage," Mom said dismissively. "We saved everything important." Well, most things. Some items were accidentally damaged during the move. Accidentally? I followed them through my own house to the garage, where dozens of cardboard boxes were stacked haphazardly. The box on top was labeled "Sarah's Junk" in my father's handwriting. When I opened it, I found my college diploma torn in half, my professional awards thrown in loose, and my grandmother's jewelry box empty. "Where are my grandmother's rings?" I asked, panic rising in my voice. "Jasmine's oldest daughter admired them so much," Mom said with a shrug. "We thought Grandma would have wanted her great-granddaughter to have them. Those rings are worth $40,000. They were left to me specifically in Grandma's will." "Family heirlooms should stay in the family," Dad said. "And since Jasmine actually has daughters to pass them down to, it makes more sense for her to keep them." Standing in my own garage, surrounded by my life packed away in boxes labeled as junk, I realized this wasn't a spontaneous decision made while I was gone. This was a carefully planned heist orchestrated by the people who had raised me, who had attended my college graduation, who had celebrated every promotion and achievement with apparent pride. But they had made one crucial mistake. In their rush to take over my home and my life, they had forgotten about the security system I had installed 6 months earlier. 24 high-definition cameras with cloud backup motion sensors and audio recording capabilities. Everything they had done in the past 3 weeks was documented in crystal-clear detail. I smiled for the first time since arriving home. They wanted to play games with my property and my trust fine. But I was about to show them that underestimating me was the biggest mistake they would ever make. That night, I checked into a hotel and spent hours reviewing the security footage on my laptop. What I discovered made my blood run cold, but also filled me with a burning determination for justice. This wasn't just about my house. It was about a systematic plan to destroy my life and steal everything I had worked for. The cameras had captured everything starting from the day after I left for Europe. My parents hadn't waited even 24 hours before arriving with a locksmith telling him they were helping their daughter with a security upgrade while she was traveling. The locksmith, having no reason to doubt them, changed every lock in the house and handed over the new keys. But the real shock came when I watched my father in my home office rifling through my filing cabinet and photographing my financial documents with his phone. He had taken pictures of my bank statements, investment portfolios, and property deeds. In one particularly damning clip, I watched him on the phone with someone saying, "She's got way more money than we thought. The house is just the beginning." My mother was equally methodical in her destruction. She had gone through every room, taking photos of valuable items and researching their worth on her tablet. I watched her package up my grandmother's jewelry, my rare book collection, and my expensive artwork labeling boxes as family inheritance redistribution. She wasn't just stealing from me. She was cataloging my entire net worth for future theft. Jasmine's role was perhaps the most heartbreaking to watch. She hadn't just moved in with her children. She had actively participated in erasing me from my own home. The footage showed her directing her kids to destroy my belongings, laughing as her 8-year-old son used my expensive kitchen knives to cut up boxes, and encouraging her 6-year-old daughter to color on my walls. When her youngest accidentally broke my grandmother's vase, Jasmine simply glued it back together and told the child, "Aunt Sarah won't even notice." The most damaging footage came from day 10 of my trip. I watched my parents meet with a man in an expensive suit, clearly a lawyer, in my living room. The audio wasn't perfect, but I could hear enough to understand they were discussing how to legally claim ownership of my property. The lawyer was explaining something about adverse possession and family trusts, while my father took notes and asked about transferring the house title. The daughter travels constantly for work, I heard my father say. She's never really here anyway. This house would serve the family better if Jasmine owned it. And she's not married, no kids, my mother added. She doesn't need all this space. It's selfish for one person to have so much when her sister's children are cramped in a tiny apartment. The lawyer seemed hesitant, explaining that property theft was a serious crime, but my father waved him off. It's not theft when it's family. We helped her buy this place originally. We have moral and financial claim to it. That was when I realized this wasn't just about my house. This was about my parents' twisted belief that my success somehow belonged to them, that my achievements were family property to be redistributed as they saw fit. They had raised me, supported my education, and now they felt entitled to the fruits of my labor. But I also discovered something else in the footage that changed everything. On day 15, while going through my office more thoroughly, my father found my safe behind a painting. Instead of respecting my privacy, he spent 3 hours trying different combinations until he cracked it. Inside, he found my emergency cash, $50,000 I kept for true emergencies, and my backup jewelry collection worth another $30,000. I watched my father count out the money and stuff it into his jacket pockets. Then he called my mother over, and together they divided up my jewelry. My mother actually tried on my pieces in front of my own mirror, admiring how they looked and discussing which items would be best for Jasmine's daughters when they got older. Sarah always was too materialistic, I heard my mother say as she fastened my diamond tennis bracelet around her wrist. Maybe this experience will teach her what really matters in life. Family comes first. My father agreed, pocketing a Rolex I had bought myself for my 30th birthday. She'll understand eventually. The footage also revealed conversations I was never meant to hear. Late one evening after the children were asleep, my parents and Jasmine sat in my living room drinking my expensive wine and discussing their long-term plans for my life. Once we establish legal claim to the house, we can start working on her other assets, my father said. She's got substantial savings accounts, and that investment portfolio is worth at least $500,000. The key is making her feel guilty, my mother added. She'll give us access to her accounts if she thinks it's for the children's education or Jasmine's future. And if she doesn't cooperate, Jasmine asked. Then we make her life uncomfortable until she does, my father replied coldly. Cut off family contact, turn the extended family against her, make her choose between her money and her family relationships. Jasmine laughed. She's always been desperate for approval. She'll cave within a month. Watching my own family plot against me was devastating, but it also clarified something important. These weren't people who loved me but had made a terrible mistake. These were people who saw me as a resource to be exploited, a bank account with legs that they had raised to fund their preferred lifestyle. But they had severely underestimated me. While they were busy stealing my possessions and plotting my financial ruin, I was building a case against them that would not only get my property back, but ensure they faced serious legal consequences for their actions. The next morning, I called my lawyer, my insurance company, and the local police department. I had documentation of breaking and entering, theft, fraud, and conspiracy. I had their conversations about planned financial manipulation recorded in high definition. I had evidence of property damage, destruction of family heirlooms, and systematic looting of my personal belongings. Most importantly, I had proof that this wasn't a family misunderstanding or a well-intentioned mistake. This was a calculated crime committed by people who thought they could steal my life's work simply because they had raised me. They wanted to play hardball with my property and my trust. Perfect. But now we were playing by my rules, and I had home field advantage in a game they didn't even know had started. The next phase of my plan required careful coordination and absolute precision. I couldn't just storm back to my house with police and lawyers. I needed to build an airtight case that would not only recover my property, but ensure my family faced serious consequences for their actions. They had counted on my emotional response and family loyalty to cloud my judgment. Instead, I was about to demonstrate exactly why underestimating me had been their fatal mistake. My first call was to my attorney, Marcus Rodriguez, who specialized in property fraud and family law. When I walked into his office with 4 hours of security footage and detailed documentation of the theft, his expression shifted from polite concern to genuine shock. "Serafina, what I'm seeing here isn't just property dispute," Marcus said, reviewing the videos on his tablet. "This is organized theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Your father breaking into your safe alone constitutes multiple felonies." "How strong is my case?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Bulletproof. The video evidence is crystal clear, the audio is damning, and the paper trail they've created by changing locks and moving belongings establishes clear intent. But I want to make sure we handle this strategically. If we move too fast, they might try to dispose of evidence or claim this was all a misunderstanding." Marcus outlined a three-pronged approach. First, we would file criminal charges with the district attorney's office for theft, burglary, and fraud. Second, we would pursue civil remedies to recover my property and seek damages for the destruction and emotional distress. Third, we would document everything for potential federal charges since the theft crossed state lines when they researched selling some items to collectors in Nevada. "I want more than just getting my house back," I told him. "I want them to understand that actions have consequences, and I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else." "Then we're going to need additional evidence of their financial planning and future intent," Marcus replied. "Can you think of any way to gather more information about their long-term schemes?" That's when I remembered my cousin David Jasmine's ex-husband and the father of her 3 children. David and I had always maintained a friendly relationship despite his messy divorce from Jasmine 2 years earlier. If anyone knew about Jasmine's financial situation and my parents' involvement in her life, it would be him. I called David that afternoon, and his reaction to my story was immediate and intense. "Are you serious right now?" David's voice was incredulous. "They actually stole your house, Sarah. I am so sorry. I had no idea they were capable of something like this." "David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Jasmine or my parents ever mentioned plans to get money from me? Any conversations about my assets or my property?" There was a long pause before David answered. "Actually, yes. About 6 months ago, when Jasmine was fighting me over child support increases, she told me she wouldn't need my money much longer because the family was working on a long-term financial solution. She said your parents had identified substantial family assets that weren't being properly utilized." "Family assets? You mean my assets?" That's exactly what I thought at the time, but Jasmine insisted it was more complicated than that. She said your parents had legal and moral claims to property that you were selfishly keeping from the family, especially from the children who needed it more. David went on to reveal conversations he had overheard during custody pickups, where my parents discussed my travel schedule, my spending habits, and my investment strategies in disturbing detail. They had been monitoring my social media posts, tracking my business trips, and even driving by my house regularly to observe my daily routines. "Sarah, they've been planning this for months," David said. "Jasmine has been telling the kids for weeks that they were going to move into a big house by the ocean, where they would have their own rooms and a swimming pool. The kids have been packing for this move since before you left for Europe." This revelation was crucial because it established premeditation and conspiracy across multiple family members. It wasn't a spontaneous decision made while I was away. It was a calculated heist that had been in planning stages for half a year. But David had more information that proved invaluable. During their divorce proceedings, he had discovered that Jasmine had significant gambling debts and credit card debt that my parents were helping her pay off. The family's financial situation was far more desperate than I had realized. "Your parents took out a second mortgage on their house 8 months ago," David explained. "Jasmine's debt was spiraling out of control, and they were covering her minimum payments to prevent bankruptcy. When you bought your villa, they saw it as the solution to all their financial problems." So this was never about family redistribution or moral claims. I said, the pieces finally falling into place. This was about using my assets to cover Jasmine's gambling addiction and my parents' financial overextension. Exactly. And Sarah, there's something else you need to know. Jasmine has been forging your signature on documents. I saw her practicing your signature last month when I was picking up the kids. When I asked her about it, she said she was helping with family business that required your authorization. That information sent chills down my spine. If Jasmine had been forging my signature, there was no telling what financial documents she might have already filed, or what accounts she might have tried to access. I immediately called my bank and investment companies to place fraud alerts on all my accounts and request detailed activity reports for the past 6 months. The investigation revealed 2 attempted unauthorized withdrawals from my savings account, both blocked by fraud protection systems, but both bearing forged signatures that closely matched my own. There were also inquiries about my investment portfolio, made by someone claiming to be my financial power of attorney. Clearly, Jasmine attempting to access my assets remotely. Armed with this additional evidence, Marcus and I met with Detective Sarah Chen from the Economic Crimes Unit. Detective Chen reviewed the security footage, the forged signature attempts, and David's testimony with the methodical attention of someone who had seen similar cases before. What you're dealing with here is sophisticated financial fraud with organized family involvement, Detective Chen explained. The premeditation, the systematic approach, and the forgery attempts elevate this beyond simple property theft. We're looking at potential felony charges for all 3 family members. How long before we can take action? I asked. We need to move carefully to preserve the evidence and prevent them from disposing of your stolen property, Detective Chen replied. But I think we can execute search and seizure warrants within 48 hours. The question is whether you want to try to resolve this within the family first, or go straight to criminal prosecution. I thought about my parents sitting in my living room wearing my clothes and jewelry, drinking my wine while plotting to steal my entire life savings. I thought about Jasmine encouraging her children to destroy my belongings while planning to forge documents to access my financial accounts. I thought about the years of manipulation, the guilt trips about family loyalty, and the calculated way they had used my love for them against me. Detective Chen, I want the full prosecution, I said firmly. These people aren't my family anymore. They're criminals who happen to share my DNA. And I want to make sure they understand that stealing from family members isn't just morally wrong. It's a crime that comes with serious consequences. The detective smiled grimly. Then let's get your house back and make sure these thieves learn exactly what justice looks like. As I walked out of the police station, I felt something I hadn't experienced since discovering the theft. Genuine hope. My family had thought they could manipulate my emotions and exploit my trust to steal everything I had worked for. Instead, they had awakened a side of me they had never seen before. They wanted to find out what happened when someone tried to destroy Serafina's life. They were about to get a very expensive education in exactly that. The raid on my own house was scheduled for Thursday morning at 6 a.m. when my parents and Jasmine would be least prepared to destroy evidence or flee with my stolen property. Detective Chen had assembled a team of 6 officers, 2 financial crimes specialists, and a digital forensics expert to ensure every piece of evidence was properly documented and preserved. I waited in an unmarked police car across the street, watching through binoculars as the team surrounded my villa. The irony wasn't lost on me. I needed police assistance to enter my own home because my family had turned it into a criminal headquarters. When the officers knocked on the front door, I could see the panic through my living room windows. Jasmine appeared first, still wearing my silk pajamas, her face shifting from confusion to terror as Detective Chen displayed the search warrant. My parents emerged from the master bedroom, my bedroom, looking disheveled and defensive. "This is harassment!" My father shouted loud enough for me to hear from across the street. "We're family members helping with house maintenance while our daughter travels for work." "Sir, please step aside and allow us to execute this warrant," Detective Chen replied calmly. "We have evidence of theft, fraud, and conspiracy that occurred on these premises." What happened next was better than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. As officers began documenting the crime scene, they discovered evidence that even I hadn't known about. Hidden in my home office, they found detailed spreadsheets my father had created listing my assets and their estimated values. The documents included research into my investment accounts, retirement funds, and even my life insurance policies. But the most damning discovery came when officers searched my parents' belongings. In my mother's purse, they found photocopies of my Social Security card, birth certificate, and passport, documents that could be used for identity theft. In my father's wallet, officers discovered receipts for locksmith services, storage unit rentals, and a consultation with a lawyer specializing in adverse possession claims. The storage unit revelation was the bombshell that transformed this from property theft to organized criminal enterprise. When officers followed up on the receipt, they discovered a 10 by 12 storage facility filled with my belongings. Artwork worth $30,000, family heirlooms. Rare books, designer clothing, and electronics had all been systematically removed from my house and hidden away. They were planning to sell everything gradually. Detective Chen explained to me later. The storage unit manager confirmed your father had been asking about selling procedures and had requested information about auction houses and estate sale companies. But Jasmine provided the most spectacular evidence against herself. When officers searched her phone, they found hundreds of photographs she had taken of my belongings, complete with research notes about their value and potential buyers. She had been creating a detailed catalog of everything worth stealing, including screenshots of eBay listings for similar items and contact information for jewelry buyers and art dealers. The text message evidence was equally damning. Jasmine's phone contained months of conversations with my parents discussing timeline strategies for the theft methods for accessing my financial accounts and backup plans if I discovered their scheme earlier than expected. One text thread from 3 weeks before my trip read, "Dad says the house cameras are fake. Just plastic boxes to scare burglars. We'll have 3 weeks minimum to get everything valuable out and establish residency before she gets back." Another message exchange revealed their plan to claim emotional damages if I tried to remove them. "Mom thinks we should have the kids crying when Sarah shows up. Make it look like she's traumatizing children by throwing them out of their new home." The most chilling message came from my mother to Jasmine. "If she fights us on this, we'll tell everyone she's having a mental breakdown from work stress. Family will believe us over her, especially if we say she's been acting erratically about money." As officers continued processing evidence, my family's criminal conspiracy began unraveling in real time. My father attempted to claim he had permission to access my safe, but the security footage clearly showed him breaking in through trial and error. My mother insisted the jewelry in her possession was borrowed, but couldn't explain why she had photographed each piece with pricing research notes. Jasmine's defense was perhaps the most pathetic. She claimed she thought I had given her the house as a gift, despite the fact that she had helped change the locks, had researched adverse possession laws, and had been planning to sell my belongings for months. The children's reactions broke my heart, but also strengthened my resolve. When officers gently questioned them, it became clear they had been told I was selfish and didn't want to share with family. Jasmine had poisoned their minds against me while training them to participate in the theft. "Aunt Sarah has too much money," 8-year-old Michael told Detective Chen matter-of-factly. "Mommy says we're helping her learn to be more generous by living in her big house." 6-year-old Emma was more direct. "We're supposed to break Aunt Sarah's fancy things because she cares more about stuff than family." The psychological manipulation of children added another layer to the criminal charges. My family hadn't just stolen my property. They had systematically corrupted young minds to justify their crimes and ensure future compliance with their schemes. By noon, the evidence collection was complete, and the scope of my family's criminal enterprise was staggering. Officers had documented theft of property worth over $200,000, attempted identity fraud conspiracy, to commit wire fraud, child endangerment through criminal instruction, and organized criminal activity spanning multiple months. My parents and Jasmine were arrested on the spot, As they were led away in handcuffs, my father made one final attempt at manipulation. "Sarah, you're destroying your own family over money and possessions. Is this really who you want to be?" I walked up to him, looked him directly in the eyes, and said, "You destroyed our family the moment you decided to steal everything I worked for. I'm just making sure you face the consequences." My mother tried a different approach, bursting into tears and claiming she was only trying to help Jasmine provide for the children. But her own text messages had already revealed her true motivations: greed, entitlement, and a twisted belief that my success belonged to them. As the police cars pulled away with my family inside, I stood in the driveway of my own home, finally able to enter freely for the first time in 3 weeks. The house was a disaster zone of broken belongings and stained furniture, but it was mine again. Detective Chen handed me a comprehensive evidence report that would be used in their prosecution. "Serafina, I've been investigating financial crimes for 12 years, and I've rarely seen a family theft operation this sophisticated and this heartless. Your video evidence made this case absolutely bulletproof." "What happens next?" I asked. "They'll all be facing multiple felony charges. With the evidence we've collected, plea bargains are unlikely. Your family is looking at serious prison time and full financial restitution for all damages." Standing in my reclaimed home, surrounded by the destruction left behind by people who were supposed to love me, I felt something unexpected relief. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely free from their manipulation, their guilt trips, and their endless demands for financial support disguised as family obligation. The people who had raised me were criminals, but I was no longer their victim. The legal aftermath moved faster than anyone expected. Within 72 hours of my family's arrest, the district attorney's office had filed formal charges that read like a crime novel: grand theft conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, burglary, destruction of property, and organized criminal activity. The evidence was so overwhelming that even the most expensive defense attorneys couldn't construct a plausible, innocent explanation. My father was charged with 19 separate felonies, including breaking and entering theft of property exceeding $50,000 and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The security footage of him methodically breaking into my safe while discussing plans to access my bank accounts eliminated any possibility of claiming this was a family misunderstanding. My mother faced 17 felony charges primarily related to identity theft and conspiracy. Her possession of my personal documents combined with her text messages about manipulating my mental health narrative painted a picture of someone who had systematically planned to destroy my life for financial gain. Jasmine's charges were the most serious of all. 23 felonies including forgery, attempted wire fraud, conspiracy, and child endangerment for involving her children in the criminal enterprise. The attempted unauthorized withdrawals from my bank accounts combined with her signature forgery practice sessions demonstrated clear intent to steal my entire life savings. But the real devastation came when the financial investigation expanded beyond my stolen property. Detective Chen's team discovered that my family's criminal behavior extended far beyond their theft from me. They had been running elaborate financial scams for years, using family connections and emotional manipulation to defraud relatives, friends, and even strangers. My parents had borrowed over $80,000 from my elderly aunts and uncles, claiming the money was for Serafina's emergency medical bills, and promising to repay everything once my insurance claims were processed. None of my relatives had ever mentioned these loans to me because my parents insisted I was too proud to admit I needed help. Jasmine had been running fake charity fundraisers through social media, claiming to collect money for children's cancer research while actually funding her gambling addiction. She had raised nearly $40,000 from family, friends, and church members, all of whom believed they were contributing to a legitimate cause. The scope of their criminal enterprise was breathtaking. They had been systematically defrauding anyone who trusted them, using my success as a cover story and my reputation as collateral for their lies. Every achievement I had earned, every promotion I had received, every dollar I had saved had been leveraged by my family to steal from innocent people. When these additional crimes were discovered, the charges multiplied exponentially. Federal investigators became involved because the fraudulent charity crossed state lines, and the Internal Revenue Service opened an investigation into unreported income from their various schemes. My father's bail was set at $500,000, which he couldn't afford because his house was already heavily mortgaged to cover their previous debts. My mother's bail was set at $300,000, equally impossible for her to meet. Jasmine's bail was initially set at $400,000, but when investigators discovered she had been planning to flee to Mexico with the children, the judge revoked bail entirely and remanded her to custody. The community reaction was swift and brutal. When local news outlets picked up the story, my family's crimes became front-page headlines. Local family arrested in elaborate theft and fraud scheme. Targeting successful daughter. The details were so shocking that the story went viral on social media, with thousands of people expressing outrage at the betrayal and supporting my decision to prosecute. My extended family's response was mixed but ultimately revealing. Some relatives expressed shock and offered support, claiming they had no idea about the extent of my parents' criminal behavior. Others, however, tried to pressure me into dropping the charges, insisting that family problems should be handled privately and that I was overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. My Uncle Robert called me directly, his voice sharp with accusation. "Sarah, your parents raised you, supported your education, and loved you unconditionally. How can you destroy their lives over money and property? This is pure selfishness." "Uncle Robert, they stole my house, my belongings, and my identity," I replied calmly. "They planned to drain my bank accounts and had already started forging my signature on financial documents. They also lied to you and everyone else to steal money for fake emergencies and fraudulent charities. This isn't about family loyalty. This is about criminal behavior." "But they're still your parents," he insisted. "Surely you can find forgiveness and work this out without involving police and lawyers." "Would you be asking for forgiveness if strangers had broken into my house, stolen my property, and planned to empty my bank accounts?" I asked. "Why should I treat family members differently when they commit the same crimes?" Uncle Robert couldn't answer that question, and his silence spoke volumes about how family manipulation had been normalized in our extended family for years. The people defending my parents weren't actually defending their actions. They were defending a system that prioritized family image over accountability and enabled criminal behavior through emotional manipulation. The breaking point came when my cousin Sarah called to inform me that my parents had been asking extended family members to contribute to their legal defense fund, claiming I had maliciously prosecuted them out of spite and that they needed money to fight false charges. "They're still trying to steal money by lying about you," Sarah said, her voice filled with disgust. "Even from jail, they're running scams and using your name to manipulate people. Sarah, I'm so sorry we didn't see this earlier." That's when I realized that prosecuting my family wasn't just about getting justice for their theft from me. It was about protecting every person they would victimize in the future, every relative they would defraud, every friend they would manipulate, and every stranger they would scam. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court revealed disturbing insights into my family's mindset. The forensic psychologist reported that my parents exhibited classic signs of financial sociopathy, viewing other people primarily as resources to be exploited, rather than individuals deserving respect and autonomy. The defendants demonstrate a fundamental inability to recognize property rights or personal boundaries when those concepts conflict with their perceived financial needs. The report stated, "They justify elaborate criminal schemes through constructed narratives of entitlement and victimization, showing no genuine remorse for the harm caused to their victims." Jasmine's evaluation was even more damning. Her gambling addiction had progressed to the point where she viewed theft and fraud as acceptable means of funding her habit, and she had systematically trained her children to participate in criminal activity through normalized dishonesty and property destruction. Standing in my restored home, reading through court documents and evidence reports, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete clarity about my family relationships. These weren't people who loved me, but had made terrible mistakes. These were predators who had used biological connections and emotional manipulation to justify systematic theft and abuse. The trial was still months away, but the outcome was already certain. My family had destroyed themselves through their own greed and criminal behavior. All I had done was document their crimes and ensure they faced appropriate consequences. For the first time in my adult life, I was free. 6 months later, the legal proceedings concluded with outcomes that exceeded even my attorney's expectations. My father was sentenced to 8 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution for all stolen property and fraud victims. My mother received 6 years in prison with the possibility of parole, after 4 years contingent on completing financial responsibility counseling and maintaining employment to pay victim restitution. Jasmine's sentence was the harshest 12 years in federal prison for the multi-state fraud scheme with no possibility of parole for the first 6 years. The judge specifically noted that her involvement of minor children in criminal activity and her systematic forgery attempts demonstrated a complete disregard for legal and moral boundaries that poses ongoing danger to society. The financial restitution exceeded $400,000, covering not only my stolen and damaged property, but also the money they had fraudulently obtained from extended family members and charity donors. Since my parents had no substantial assets beyond their heavily mortgaged house, which was sold to begin covering their debts, full restitution would likely take decades to complete. But the most satisfying outcome wasn't the prison sentences or the money recovered. It was the complete vindication of my decision to prosecute and the overwhelming support I received from people who truly understood what family should mean. David Jasmine's ex-husband was awarded full custody of the 3 children after Jasmine's conviction. He called me the day the custody decision was finalized, his voice filled with gratitude and relief. "Sarah, I can't thank you enough for having the courage to expose what they were doing," he said. The court-ordered psychological evaluations revealed that Jasmine had been training our kids to lie, steal, and manipulate people as normal behavior. If you hadn't stopped this, they would have grown up thinking criminal activity was acceptable family business. The children were enrolled in therapy to address the psychological damage from their involvement in the theft and fraud schemes. Initial reports suggested they were responding well to counseling and were beginning to understand the difference between healthy family relationships and criminal manipulation. My extended family relationships underwent a complete transformation. Relatives who had initially pressured me to forgive and forget gradually came to understand the scope of my parents' criminal behavior as more victims came forward with their own stories of financial manipulation and theft. Aunt Patricia, who had lost $15,000 to my parents' fake medical emergency story, called to apologize for initially defending them. "Serafina, I'm ashamed that I asked you to drop the charges," she said through tears. "I had no idea they had been stealing from all of us for years. You saved us from losing even more money to their lies." Uncle Robert, who had been the most vocal critic of my decision to prosecute, eventually admitted that my parents had borrowed $8,000 from him just 2 months before their arrest, claiming it was to help me with temporary financial difficulties during my business trip. "I feel like such a fool," he said when he called to apologize. "They used your success and my love for you to steal my money, and then they convinced me you were the problem when you held them accountable for their crimes." The revelation that my family had been systematically defrauding relatives for years helped everyone understand that this wasn't about one daughter being vindictive toward loving parents. This was about stopping career criminals who used family relationships as cover for elaborate theft operations. My professional life flourished in ways I never expected. Word of my successful prosecution of family fraud spread through my industry, and I was invited to speak at conferences about financial security and family boundary setting. My story resonated with countless people who had experienced financial abuse from relatives and felt guilty about considering legal action. One speaking engagement led to a consulting opportunity with a major corporation developing fraud prevention software. My real-world experience with sophisticated family fraud provided insights that helped them create better detection algorithms for identity theft and financial manipulation schemes. But the most meaningful change was the family I chose to build after cutting ties with my biological relatives. Detective Sarah Chen became a close friend, and through her, I met a community of people who understood the difference between healthy family loyalty and enabling criminal behavior. I started hosting monthly gatherings at my restored villa for people recovering from family financial abuse. The support group grew from 3 people to over 20, including David and his children, several of my parents' other fraud victims, and people from the community who had experienced similar betrayals. These gatherings became the family celebrations I had always imagined having in my dream house. Instead of relatives who saw me as a financial resource to be exploited, I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being and respected my achievements as the result of my own hard work. 1 year after the arrests, I received an unexpected letter from my mother in prison. She claimed she had been attending counseling, had found religion, and wanted to apologize for her actions. The letter was filled with requests for forgiveness, promises to change, and subtle hints that she hoped I would consider helping with her legal appeals. I showed the letter to my therapist, who helped me recognize the continued manipulation tactics embedded in what appeared to be a genuine apology. My mother was still trying to use emotional leverage to achieve financial objectives just from a prison cell, instead of my living room. I chose not to respond to the letter. Some people might call that cold or unforgiving, but I had learned the difference between healthy forgiveness and enabling continued abuse. Forgiveness didn't require me to restore relationships with people who had demonstrated they would continue exploiting any access I gave them. My house became exactly what I had envisioned when I bought it, a space for genuine celebration, authentic relationships, and peaceful solitude. The infinity pool hosted birthday parties for children who had been taught healthy family values. The wine cellar was shared with friends who appreciated good vintages without feeling entitled to them. The master bedroom was mine alone, free from the fear that someone might steal it while I was away. Looking back on this experience, I realized that my parents had actually given me an invaluable gift through their betrayal. They had forced me to discover my own strength to prioritize my well-being over their manipulation and to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than biological obligation. The security cameras that caught their crimes were still active, but now they recorded birthday parties, holiday celebrations, and quiet evenings with people who genuinely cared about me. My house was finally the home I had always wanted it to be. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between family loyalty and personal protection? Have you experienced financial manipulation from relatives who claimed they were helping you? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if this story of family karma and justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life tales of standing up to toxic family dynamics. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to freedom. Remember that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into, and that protecting yourself from people who would harm you isn't selfish. It's necessary. Until next time, may you find the courage to set boundaries that protect your peace and prosperity.